That's right, folks. I'm doing another rebuttal video to After School. And for those who do not remember, After School is dedicated to feeding your mind to help you be your best self. And I am doing this because I got a request to do this. This particular After School video is based on a bit from a George Carlin routine from 2005. And this is a pretty popular bit. This one has almost 2 million views on YouTube alone, but for those who don't know, this is the big club and you ain't in it bit from George Carlin, which I've seen make the rounds on social media multiple times over the years, often with millions of views, millions of shares, millions of positive impressions. So this bit has definitely had an impact on the culture, and a lot of people seem to like it. And I want to preface this. I don't usually do this, but I want to preface this by saying that George Carlin is a comedy legend. I love a lot of his work, especially his work on concepts and his work on religion, which helped reinforce me when I was a young teenager and I started questioning religion. So I am a fan of George Carlin, and I don't like going after comedians, especially their work on stage. But again, I got a request to do this, and this is a pretty popular bit, and there's a lot wrong with it. But I do not want this to be perceived as a blanket condemnation on George Carlin or his comedy career, which I think is arguably second to none.
Be happy with what you got, because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The big, wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important...
Big, wealthy business interests that control everything. Is that true, folks?
Make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. Politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have...
And look at this. Look at this little fat kid with the which that appears to be an iPhone. Now, this animation is After School's spin on the bit. This bit is from 2005, so it actually predates the iPhone. But why do people buy iPhones? Why do people spend $1,000 on a device like the iPhone and then spend upwards of $100 a month on the cellular data service? Is it to please their corporate overlords and their masters and the wealthy business interests? Or is it because the iPhone and internet service significantly improves the standard of living? Otherwise, why would people spend all this money on it?
Owners, they own you. They own everything.
You have owners, they own you, and that just means you're a slave. Do you guys think you're a slave? I mean, I know there's a lot of things wrong politically. I know there's a lot of regulation and whatnot, and government trying to tell people what to do and how to live. But I think to a large extent, people are mostly free. I mean, this is pretty big stuff coming from a guy who made a career, who made millions of dollars, talking shit for a living.
They own all the important land. They own and control.
They own all of the important land. Is that true? They own all of the important land. Meanwhile, what is it? Half, if not more? I know it's millions of acres west of the Mississippi River in the United States is owned and controlled by the federal government. Not to mention, if you yourself, I mean, do you guys own property? Does anyone out there? Do you guys own land and own houses and businesses and cars? Which, if you do, is probably thanks in large part to big wealthy business interests like banks who lent you that money with whatever capitalism is left in banking and finance. So if you buy property and if you have to borrow money, if you have to take out a mortgage and you eventually pay that mortgage off and you own the property outright, you have big wealthy business interests to thank, which you probably would have achieved that better and cheaper if it weren't for bureaucrats.
Control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid.
They own and control the corporations. Well, they should be privately owned.
Pay for the Senate.
Does Carlin want fascism?
At the Congress, the state houses, the city halls, they got the judges in their back pockets.
They got the judges in their back pockets. Tell that to J.D. Rockefeller. and Mark Zuckerberg and Google and all of these titans of industry who keep getting drug in front of Congress to get shook down by scumbag politicians.
The big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get.
Yeah, media should be privately owned. Isn't that consistent with the First Amendment? Don't you want private people, private entities owning the media? I mean, that happened to NBC back in the day. What, the 30s or 40s, NBC grew and grew, and they were a successful media company. And then the government got involved, and they slapped them with antitrust legislation and said, "Hey, NBC, you have a little too much, so we're gonna make you sell some of it." And they did, and it eventually became what is known today as ABC. So isn't that wonderful that you can build a media business and it can be so popular and successful that some scumbag politician can come around one day and say, "Hey, buddy, you're doing too good there. You got to give some of that up." Isn't that wonderful, folks?
Here, they got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want.
Yeah, and I don't like that business is in bed with politicians and government. And yeah, when politicians and bureaucrats try to tell businesses what to do and how to operate, businesses will eventually have to lobby them to keep them off their ass. This is what happens when you get a mixed economy with a welfare state and a regulatory state. You get pressure group warfare.
Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else.
Well, that's just zero-sum nonsense. You can, I guess according to Carlin, if you win in a trade, you must be exploiting someone. More for yourself and less for everyone else.
But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest.
That's against their interest. Now, think this through for a second, people. It doesn't matter if you're a homeless bum living in a tent on Skid Row, or if you're a millionaire business executive playboy living in a penthouse in Manhattan. It doesn't matter. Is it for or against your interest to have a population capable of critical thinking? Is it for or against your interest to have your neighbors and everyone else in your society be capable of thinking? Not to mention, again, he's trying to blame this on what? Big business interests? Who's controlled the schools for the last few decades, if not century or longer? Even if you want to start the goalpost at Brown versus the Board of Education, which I think was, 1956? This stand-up bit was 2005. The government controlled the schools for decades. So if the population is not capable of critical thinking, whose fault is that? If anything, especially when you consider the Amazon and Apple and social media and internet, big business is making education and information more accessible than ever before. But it's their fault that people can't think.
They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime.
Again, think this through for a second. Is this really good for the wealthy business interests? An example I like to use, and I've used it before, is the fact that Thomas Edison, after he was well-established, had a well-established company, he once employed a young Henry Ford, who I think worked as a mechanic in one of the Thomas Edison shops or whatever. But think this through for a second. Think about it. If you're Thomas Edison and you're one of the wealthy business interests and you have a brilliant mind like Henry Ford working in one of your shops, what's in your best interest? Is it in your best interest for Henry Ford to think and use his mind and eventually move on and create his own business, jumpstart the automotive industry, create unimaginable innovation, create the automobile, create unimaginable amounts of economic prosperity and jobs and wealth, which in turn help out Thomas Edison Illuminating Company, because you're going to need light bulbs to put on the heads of cars for headlights on cars. You're going to need light bulbs to light up the assembly lines at night. You're going to need electricity to power the assembly lines at night and whatnot. Anyway, what's in your interest? For Henry Ford to use his mind and start his own thing, start his own company and everything I just said? Or would it be in Thomas Edison's best interest for Henry Ford to just mindlessly show up to work at Thomas Edison Illuminating Company and just be all like, "Hey boss, thanks for giving me a job. What am I gonna do today?" Anyone who is impressed by this is a total clodpole.
Pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something?
They're coming for your Social Security so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. Now, notice how he's framing this. They're coming for your Social Security. That's an interesting way to frame it, because Social Security is literally the government coming for your paycheck. They're coming for 6% of your paycheck because they think you're too stupid and too irresponsible to save your own money for your own retirement. So they're going to take it, and then if you make it to 65, then they're going to give you they're going to give you some of it back. Not to mention, so they're going to give it to their friends on Wall Street. Does Carlin know how Social Security is funded? It's not funded by Wall Street or Wall Street taxes or any of that shit. It's funded by, again, income taxes. So if Social Security were thrown in the garbage where it belongs, that would just mean that people keep more of their own money. Of course, it might end up helping Wall Street if people saved their own money and put that money in a Roth IRA or 401k or whatever and bought stocks and mutual funds and whatnot. Yeah, maybe that would benefit Wall Street, but that would also benefit the people investing their own money.
Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. And by the way, it's the same big club they use to beat you over the head with all day long, where they tell you what to believe.
Again, after school, adding this animation, just demonizing big business and iPhones. After school would not have an audience if it weren't for technology like iPhones and computers and greedy corporations like Google happily subsidizing and hosting their videos.
Believe all day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged, and nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hardworking people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hardworking people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich cocksuckers who don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all. At all.
And I say, good. I don't want politicians caring about me. I don't want the government caring about me. You know what happens when politicians and the government care about you? That's when they try to tell you what to do and how to live. That's when they tell you how much money you're allowed to make, how much of your paycheck you're allowed to keep, tell you what schools to send your kids to, what's going to be taught in the schools. They'll tell you whether or not you can use plastic straws, which is becoming a big deal here in the People's Republic of California. They're going to tell you they're going to tax soda in the name of they're going to outlaw tobacco. They just raised the tobacco age to 21. They're going to tell you what drugs you're allowed to use and not use. They're going to tell you what medicine you're allowed to use and not use. They're going to tell you what words you can and cannot say. This is pretty rich coming from George Carlin, who is famous for his 7 words you can't say on television bits. Why is it that politicians made it illegal to say certain words on television, on broadcast television? It's because politicians care about you, and they care about family values, and they care about the children. Carlin has a point here. They are depriving Carlin the choice of which words he can use and not use in his own comedy routines. And this is pretty disappointing coming from someone intelligent like George Carlin, because he does have a point. I just think his anger is directed at the wrong people. It should be directed at politicians and government who deprive him of choice in the name of caring. And it doesn't stop at the speech regulation. George Carlin, for those who don't know, I actually looked into this recently. I mentioned this in a recent video about tax evasion. George Carlin struggled with taxes throughout his entire life. You guys remember that video I did months back where that Bernie brat was all butthurt and bitching about Bill Burr not wanting to pay Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's ridiculous 70% marginal tax rate? And a lot of them try to justify it by saying, oh, well, we had 70% marginal tax rates in America before and we're still here. What's the big deal? That's why George Carlin struggled with taxes, because apparently in the 70s, he made a lot of money, and that was an era when America had a 70% marginal tax rate. And as a result, government looters were on Carlin's ass throughout most of his life. And Carlin even said that was a reason why he worked harder, and that's why he tried to put out specials every year, was to keep the government and the bureaucrats off his ass. So it was the governments, it was politicians, it was feel-good, caring politicians that were trying to deprive Carlin the choice of what to do with his money. And who gave him the opportunity to keep the looters at bay and the IRS at bay? Who gave Carlin the money-making opportunities to pay off the people that wanted to break his fucking legs? It was wealthy business interests. It was greedy corporations like HBO who gave him multiple paid comedy specials. It was greedy corporations like MCI who gave George Carlin commercial endorsement opportunities in the 90s by doing 10-10-220 commercials. It was greedy corporations like MGM who gave George Carlin a paid residency in Las Vegas that paid him to do live stand-up shows. So again, this is really disappointing coming from someone intelligent like George Carlin, who has a good point. It's just that he directs his anger in the wrong place.